Many of you, like me, are probably tired of hearing about the climate conferences of parties, the 1.5 degrees Celsius, and yet another report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Maybe you don't even care about climate change. I understand why discussing the goals we must reach and the consequences of not reaching them may become cumbersome. It has been the same story since the 1970s without much progress. But what if I told you that you should still care, and that there is even reason to? Instead of discussing futures and consequences and likelihoods, there is action that we can take here and now. This action can take place in our daily lives, and especially in how we use innovations. The first time I remember hearing about climate change, I was 9 years old. My class was shown a video of a polar bear on an ice cap floating away. Clearly, this video made an impact, otherwise I wouldn't be sharing it with you now. To save the polar bear, my class was taught to turn off lights when we left a room and to only use one sheet of paper when drying our hands. Now, 13 years later, I have to ask myself if this made any impact. This is why I would like to speak with you today about how innovation increases consumption. How many of you here are studying engineering? I am. In your classes, you probably discuss innovation, how to innovate, what the most recent innovations are, what innovation should be. I know that I have discussed electric vehicles and recycled plastics as two ideals of innovation. Although, how critically do we discuss the negatives? Jason Henderson, a professor at San Francisco State University, writes about the mobility injustices of electric vehicles. Their impact on carbon emissions is limited. They do little to reduce the carbon emissions in the transport sector. If 100% of all vehicle sales in the next year were electric vehicles, there would only be a 5% total increase. We would need all cars to be electric to reach zero emissions in the transport sector. Yet, in 2020, the number of traditional vehicles increased by 80,000 more units than electric vehicles. Even if all cars were electric, if the sources of the electricity are not sustainable, then neither will be the driving. And those with an electric vehicle tend to drive more than those with the traditional car anyways, increasing emissions even more. These misconceptions exist in another industry, fashion. In the fashion industry, the use of recycled plastic clothing can reduce emissions up to 32%. This innovation is so popular that projections predict the demand for recycled plastic clothing will become greater than the number of PET plastic bottles to recycle, while only 13% of our clothes even get recycled. Recycling plastics, especially PET plastic bottles, takes them out of their 10 times circular lifespan and turns it into a single-use linear life. 35% of microplastics in the ocean are shed from our clothing. The use of polyester fabrics, recycled or not, will continue to contribute to this. These ideas that technology solves all is what I think has brought us to this standstill when looking back at climate action. Lack of change is not what you would expect as a result of innovation. So, what can we do? How are we supposed to innovate? More radical environmentalists promote ideas of A-growth and degrowth. They promote the idea that the ideal model of sustainable development is one that prioritizes the environment as first, because without it, social growth and economic growth are not possible. It also believes that social growth is possible without economic growth, and that economic growth indicators are not indicative of well-being. A-growth innovations would be turning away from something new and looking at what we already have and how we can be more sustainable with that. An easy example of this is the bicycle, an innovation that I believe many of you are already familiar with. Even the Netherlands, one of the best equipped cycling countries in the world, is still car reliant. Increasing forms of physical activity, physical mobility, like cycling, has been shown to have drastic effects on reducing the environmental impact of the transport industry. It improves social inclusion and has massive health benefits which save hospital costs. For example, the WHO recommends adults have 150 to 300 minutes of moderate aerobic physical activity a week. 81% of 11 to 17-year-olds do not meet this, and nor do 23% of adults. If we cycled to work or school, these 22 minutes a day would easily be reached. For those of you who travel far distances, you're probably thinking that this isn't realistic. However, globally, 50% of all car trips are under 5 kilometers. Coming back to the Netherlands, about 27% of all trips made are by bike, and this saves over 19 billion euros a year in health costs. This is just over 3% of the country's gross domestic product. We've had the bicycle since the 1800s. It's about time we start relying on them instead of our cars. Degrowth innovations try to reduce our production consumption so that our output can stay within the planetary boundaries. It also believes that technology cannot solve all. If you are having trouble imagining this, think about tiny houses or van living. Another example is renaturation. Rivers, forests, grasslands, anywhere that has been built up can be restored back to a version of what it once was. River renaturation projects have been taken on in the Netherlands. By returning canals into free-form rivers, this prevents flooding, reduces damages, and restores ecosystems. Another example is the Rails to Trails project in the United States. It is a good memory of mine. It restores unused train tracks into accessible trails to be used recreationally. Additional benefits include allowing natural areas to recover where they had once been cleared for tracks and track maintenance, as well as making ecosystem services like nature appreciation more accessible. My mother and I would go cycling on a trail in Pennsylvania. It was always a moment for us to spend time together. I was able to see animals and land formations because of this project's initiative to renature. These examples show that more benefits can come from reducing our consumption and changing how we innovate to reach goals of degrowth instead. Thinking back to that polar bear on an ice cap floating away and the lessons we learned. Turning off lights and only using one sheet of paper. These lessons were not so far off. They promoted messages of reduction. Why did we lose this as we got older? Why do we innovate for more? Also, you can bring these ideas of A-growth and degrowth into your lives. You can try secondhand shopping. You'll never be happier than only paying 10 euros for a pair of brand jeans. Instead of getting the newest phone or tablet, stick with what you have a little bit longer, or try buying a modular phone. Reduce buying from major corporations and start buying seasonal and local. If you are in engineering, design, or policy, try creating a solution or an innovation for degrowth goals instead. There are so many possibilities to choose from. What will be your contribution? Thank you.